This is International Master Eric Kislik. Today we're going to look at Game 3 of the World Championship match between Gukesh and Liren. This was the game where Gukesh evened up the score at 1.5, 1.5. And I said right here that this game featured poor metagame strategy by Liren. When you're in the lead in a vital match, always choose the safest alternatives when available and minimize risk. If risk is needed later, you can course correct at a later moment. This is the exact premise behind playing for two results with white, which every Grandmaster does very often, and really every International Master. Essentially, the idea would be, well, if I'm playing white, I want to play in such a way, if I'm playing for two results in particular, like let's say I don't have to go crazy trying to play for a win, the idea would be that in playing for two results, the only results are I win or I draw, meaning either the structure is very, very safe, or I have a bailout to basically a guaranteed draw, or, let's say there are some possibilities of perpetual check, or just simply my structure is extremely safe. But there are a lot of lines where if the opponent finds the absolute best line, it's a forced draw, or it just kind of fizzles out. So that's mainly what we're referring to. Anyway, we get d4 by Gukesh. Him playing something different from e4 in the earlier game. Knight of 6, knight of 3, d5. Interesting move order. c4, e6, c takes d5. Here I said this is not a serious try, especially not a very serious try, but it led to a novel position and a time advantage for Gukesh, so it succeeded. One can either get a time advantage, a familiarity advantage, or a static advantage on the board. And since he managed to get the first two, he can consider what he did a success. So this is all in the context of a World Championship match. If you get a big time edge out of the opening, like let's say you're up an hour, okay, that means your preparation worked. If you have a major familiarity advantage, that can lead to you simply playing the position better. Let's say 100 points superior to your opponent. That's a second advantage. And of course, the other one we're referring to is a real, positional plus equal. So anyway, c takes d5, e takes d5, knight c3, c6, queen c2. Very typical QGD exchange, Queen's Gambit declined exchange variation. I played it quite a bit from both sides of the board. Did pretty well with it, to be honest. g6, h3, and I think it's because I just generally had a pretty good grasp on what I wanted to achieve from both sides of the board. So h3 is an interesting move, kind of flirting with various g4 moves. Black has a lot of options here. For example, black could even play the a5 move. You might look at a5 and go, well, what's the point of that move? Well, one thing that it does is it does advance black's majority preemptively, which is typically useful. Plus, there are also ideas like knight a6 to b4 if white goes e3, bishop d3. So it is actually a purposeful thing to consider. Let's say here, queen c1, a4, g4, bishop e4. Yeah, very safe for black. Very safe for black. So bishop f5 was played by Ding. Queen b3, queen b6, very standard. You can also go queen c7, although most likely you're going to go back to, go to b6 anyway if they go g3, bishop f4. So queen b6 is very sound. g4. Okay, this was the first moment where I started to think, okay, well, he doesn't need to take any great amount of risk here. And so I was just thinking, why doesn't he just go bishop to e6? And then you start to look at it and you go, yeah, there's absolutely no problem with this. Also, let me show you one thing that can deepen your understanding of why bishop e6 is so good. Because you might be thinking, well, what if they go knight g5 takes e6? Well, remember, that's 2 tempi. So what's the value of the bishop pair? Well, it's roughly half a pawn. That's 2 tempo. That's 2 tempi. So it's, a tempo is roughly a quarter of a pawn. So 2 quarters, and you have half a pawn. So even if they do that, the time factor in going knight g5 doesn't really give white anything. Plus, just look at generally how solid black structure is here. a6, bishop d2, bishop b4. Pretty safe, stable square there. f4, I go h6. Yeah, I could just provoke it and just go king f7, no problem. e3, king f7. King e2. I can just go rook a d8. But yeah, I mean, you can just see how insanely solid black's position is. And again, what is the unopposed bishop now that they have the bishop pair for white? Bishop on g2. Not really doing that much. You know, essentially biting granite on d5, so not really doing all that much. He decided to take on b3. Okay. I mean, it does double and isolate the pawns, but also opens up the rook on a1. So, debatable. And with bishop c2, I said this was truly unnecessary and ultimately what led to Ding's downfall. Yeah, once again, I was just wondering, well, why don't I just go here? Why don't I just go bishop e6? Say here, I go knight e4. Yeah, look at the pawn break I can play. I can just play the natural h5. Super natural there. Take, 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 take. Yeah, very comfortable for black here. c4, I can just go bishop f5, so no problems at all here for black. All right, so he goes for bishop c2. Quite a risky move. Now bishop to f4. Yeah, I mean, and one move that I didn't put in here, which is important to understand, is what if he had taken the pawn? And actually, you know what? I saw a bunch of analysis and no one even commented, well, what happens if he takes the pawn? So the problem with taking the pawn is that then I have this move. And when you go here, I go take e3. And the whole point of doing all this must be to keep the pawn. But the problem is if you play b5, well, we'll look at the move bishop to g2. The problem is you're pinned all over the place here. So, and that's just one of the options. You know, you could actually, I mean, theoretically, you could even play knight takes, right? Because you have bishop g2 because the piece is trapped. So, so taking the pawn is not even an option. So, in other words, when you go bishop c2, the whole purpose of it is, well, I'm going to try to be annoying with my pieces and hopefully I'll achieve something. But if I don't, the bishop needs to come out very quickly. Otherwise, I'm just taking an extremely unnecessary risk. So after bishop f4, I said that, you know, I gave a dubious mark to h5. I mean, ultimately, I think the computer will show that h5 is very close to being equal, as you might expect in a position like this where there's no compelling edge. But I kind of liked actually just going h6. So let's say take, knight e4, you know, giving up a pawn, bishop b4, and then I can take here. Yeah, now I can safely take. And now I can go knight to d6, knight c8, take, and castles. So perfectly good. I can go knight d6, resurrect the knight. Everything is perfectly sound here, so no problems at all there. So that's what I thought was the simplest to actually sack a pawn. I didn't actually really see anybody discussing that h6 move, but kind of the coolest move, actually, when you think about it. So h5, rook to g1. Okay, good move. Good move. Just trying to keep the bishop locked in here. So, I mean, in a general sense, yes, knight bd7, that's a good move. So you might wonder, well, what's the point of knight bd7? Well, the idea here is now I can take, bring the bishop here, and then go knight b6 and defend the pawn. So now you're actually considering taking the pawn on b3. Again, another point that I didn't really hear people discussing, but that's the point of it. Okay, so knight to d2, and now rook g8. I said this was a great move from recall, but the whole sequence should have been played more quickly because he was so far behind on the clock. Now, here's what the problem is. Here's what the general problem is. Even after what could be considered very interesting, dynamic, good computer preparation, well, white can still play rook c1. You have to play g5, bishop to e3, bishop to e4. But then the whole problem here is like take, I go f3, take, a5, I go rook h1. I mean, the problem here is white has the bishop pair. You're not even up anything here. So I go rook a1, I go bishop c1. Now I'm going to try to go e4. So knight b6, I go e4, take. Now, I mean, granted, a very interesting line, but I mean, all things considered, we probably do have to consider this at least slightly better for white because of the bishop pair here. Yeah, there aren't that there aren't that many pawns on the board, and we're going to trade off some pawns. But yeah, you can't really make an argument. You can't really make an argument here for black being 100% equal. So I just think to myself, well, if you look at that bishop e6 line that we were analyzing, where it was perfectly safe, white doesn't have any threats, and in order to beat you, here's what has to happen. First of all, they have to fight extremely hard for a small edge. Then when they get that small edge, they have to fight extremely hard and play very accurately to convert that into a positionally won game. And then when they're, let's say, +1, then they have to convert that into a win with excellent technique for, let's say, 20 moves. And if you're playing black in a world championship match under completely normal circumstances where you're ahead 1 win to 0, you need to make your opponent do all 3 of those things. Fight extremely hard for an edge, work very, very hard and play very accurately to make it positionally winning, plus over minus, and then still work very hard with perfect technique to convert that into a win. The problem was he didn't do any of that. He ends up losing a piece and ignominiously losing the game. And what I was saying about the opening prep here, the reason I didn't like this opening prep is, why are you setting yourself up in this situation when the bishop just could have been on e6 and there would have been no problems to begin with? So luckily Gukesh did not play the strongest move. He played g5. By the way, a lot of people just looked at g5 and just kind of skipped over it, didn't even say a word. But that was reasonably important inaccuracy. All right, so knight h5, bishop to h2. Now I will give Ding credit here. Rook h8 was a nice move. I did see some people give him credit for this move. It is a switchback, returning to a square where the piece previously was, but under better circumstances. So that was a good move. Okay, so Gukesh goes f3. He's clearly going for the piece here. He's clearly eyeing the idea of, all right, let me go here and here, cut off the escape for the bishop and try to win it, see if I can win the game that way. But better was just to go bishop h3, f5, take, king f7, and bishop f5. And the piece returns home. We're safe. So, as you can see here, that was clearly the correct way for this position to be played. Yeah, I was kind of surprised that that's what we did not see. Kind of surprised that's what we didn't see at the board. Okay, so f3, knight to g7, hitting the bishop, bishop g3. Okay, so now I feel like black didn't really understand how to save his bishop. By the way, could have just gone bishop to f5 and bishop to e6 after e4. And I said that the best move here is just to go bishop to e7. So what's the point of bishop e7? Again, I didn't really see anybody discuss this either. The point is I take, and then the piece comes back, and then we have no problems. That's exactly what we wanted. We wanted to be able to take that piece on d2. So, line I analyzed here, e4, take, knight f5, hitting that bishop, so improving that poor knight, and bishop to f4. And I think there's a very good practical argument that black is better here. Again, look at the structure. 5 isolated pawns. White's 5 remaining pawns are all isolated thanks to taking g5 and provoking e takes d5. So this is dream positional chess for black. Yeah, I mean, if you look at the start of this, at the moment, there are only 2 isolated pawns. Then the sequence is played, suddenly there are 5. Now, they're obviously going to trade off one of them, but I still basically stand by the idea that white's the one clearly trying to play to draw here and clearly not doing all that well. And, I also have ideas of rook h2 as a possibility. Knight b6, check, and king d8. Yeah, and here I said black is slightly better. Now, the best chance here is going to be to go for some major simplification. So that'll be ideas like playing d5, playing bishop takes f5, going for some very forcing sequence, damaging the structure, trying to trade off. But all that pressure is on white, so white clearly has to try to draw there. So bishop e7 would have been a crucial move. Now, there were a lot of people who believed that this was just simply a lost position after rook h5. That's not true, because black did have an excellent way to get back material. Let me show you how. So e4 played by Gukesh. Now the piece is clearly trapped. He's going to try to go for rook c1, try to grab that. And here I did give a question mark to d takes e4, even though he still should be able to draw the game. And I said this makes the defense harder because he needed an escape route for the c2 bishop to cause maximum damage with the Desperado. Not taking on e4 leaves the pawn on f3, so he wants to leave the pawns here so that he can play stuff like this. Bing, bing. I can hit f3 and then hit e4. So that's what we want. I said not taking on e4 leaves the pawn on f3, so black can give up the knight there to save the bishop. All right, so let me show you best play here. I did see one grandmaster point this out, so to his credit, there was one player who pointed this out. Rook c1, so I'm trapping the piece. Takes, I'm defending the piece. Bishop to f2. Bishop c5. It's also important to have the idea of being able to take on f2, so that's also important here. Notice one thing that we're getting out of this. We are not letting white keep the bishop pair. Very, very important. So let's say rook g2, bang, 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 take, bishop takes. I'm doing this with tempo here. By the way, get a beautiful move here. Notice the sideways pin. I don't know anybody who teaches this concept of exploiting sideways pins and even discussing sideways pins, but I talk about it a lot with my students, and I think it should be a much more widespread and well-known topic. So I'll have a video at another point in the future after the World Championship match talking about sideways pins. So what does this do? It just leads to major simplification. So basically right here, I mean, we have, we have 3 pawns for the piece. And again, what are their remaining pawns? Well, they're going to have to try to win the game with doubled and isolated B pawns that are obviously not passed. So I said this is the worst case scenario for white. He has 2 double and isolated pawns. Black has 3 pawns for the piece. His bishop is blunted by black structure, these pawns here. And black's rook is active. All of this would point to a draw being by far the most likely outcome. But yeah, objectively, this is definitely a draw. And, what's very fascinating, when you check this on very high depth with Stockfish, it's just 0.00. It's not even something like 0.4. It's just 0. Yeah, it clearly understands it's not going to win this. Yeah. I mean, only 1 pawn left. Only 1 pawn left. Black's doing pretty well here with the active rook. Other line I put in here was bishop takes d4, take, and here I am able to once again take, but now I get rook h4. Once again we achieved 2 things. We got rid of their bishop pair and we isolated all of their pawns. So those are both excellent achievements in this line. So we basically gave them the worst of all worlds, and we will almost definitely take one of those pawns, whether it's e4 or whether it's g5. I mean, the problem with g5 is that it can be surrounded by, like this, castles, and, putting the rook on e5. And obviously I'm making a bunch of moves there, but notice, well, they have to also defend this. So if g5 falls, of course, we're talking about 100%, chance that black is equal there. All right, so d takes c4 was a mistake because now you can simply get less for the bishop. So if you could have at least made the argument I'm getting more out of it, you'd be on your way to a draw, or at least a clear draw. Now, I do think he's still within the drawing range here, but he makes the losing move on the next move. And by the way, nobody pointed this out, that black is able to draw. And I think the simple reason why is, and I don't want to be too harsh on other people here and toot my own horn or anything, but essentially what typically happens here is, people want to get their analysis out. People are paid for their analysis, like, if they're doing them on different sites or the official site. So they want to get the analysis out. They want to get their videos out quickly. As you can see, I apparently didn't get this video out that quickly. I had to go to sleep last night, so that's why I didn't. So I did not get this out as quickly as they did, but I did check every single move in this analysis at depth 40 and some at depth 50 on super strong hardware. So I did, I probably did about 3 hours of analysis on this game after the game while, I had the, experience of following the game too. So, I basically spent 5-6 hours on this one singular game to work out all this analysis. And, I think what happens is the computer says plus 1.3, plus 1.4, and people watching the game just go, yeah, that sounds right. Seems like it's losing. But I'll tell you from my perspective, I kind of, first of all, I have that mom principle, most obvious move principle, talked about in applying logic in chess. Very simple principle, but basically, when there are obvious moves, you have to look at every single one of them, or else your analysis is not complete. And especially if you think a position is winning, the burden of proof is on you to prove that. It's not my job as the defender to say, in a relatively bad position or bad-looking position to say, oh, well, I have a little bit of I have a pretty good defense. I don't see how you win, but yeah, it's just bad for me. No, the burden of proof is on the player claiming that it's a win. And if you can't prove the win, it's not a win. The game's not over yet. So if you're claiming that the game is coming to a completion, our victory has achieved its fruition here, you actually have to prove it. So here's what I said. I said this cost the game. Bishop g7, played in the game, cost the game. The best chance was to trade off the bishop pair. That's what I said in the previous line. And leave white with only 2 or 3 pawns, and ideally isolated. After all of those exchanges, it is unlikely white would have won, or at least had an extremely difficult time doing it in over 50 moves. But yes, objectively should have been a draw. Now, why do I think everybody missed this move? So bishop c5, knight a4. Now, I think some people looked at different moves like knight takes b3 and stuff like that, and yeah, you play out the line a little bit, and black is in very bad shape. Now, what's really cool about this is queenside castling is the most natural move, also super logical too. Why is it really logical? Well, as the defensive side, if I can trade off their bishop pair and a whole bunch of pieces and then take e4 at the end of all that, again, what are they left with? 3 isolated pawns. They may not be able to win that, because how are they going to try to win? Are they going to win by mating my king? Probably not. They likely don't have enough force for that. Are they going to win by gobbling up all my pawns? There's a chance they could attack f7 or something, but probably not going to win anything on the queen side. So both of those are kind of long shots. Are they going to try to win by queening a pawn? Yeah, that's normally what you would try to do in this kind of an ending. But with only those 3 isolated pawns and more pawns coming off the board, you're not going to be able to win this. And one grandmaster, he asked me, he said, how did you find queenside castling? And I just said, well, I thought it was the most natural move on the board. I trade off a bunch of pieces, I get rid of their bishop pair, I bring my rook to the d4 square. Notice we have this x-ray in this sequence. Boom, 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 boom. And now my rook is right there. Now my rook is right there, and then I go knight takes e4. So, from my perspective, I was looking at that and going, that looks like a really natural continuation. And again, remember what I was saying before. I'm not convinced this is winning for white, but if I can play out, 20 moves, try every logical idea for black, and it's just losing in all lines, I'll go, yeah, okay, I'm convinced. It's basically like I'm a jury, and I'm asking the computer to convince me that this is plus minus in all lines. I'm saying, all right, well, I'm the jury here. Can you prove to me this is winning? We can't. Well, maybe I have an amazing move that I show that, I don't know, 5 or 6 strong grandmasters, some 2,700, some 2,800, who analyzed this game. They all missed it, and it's the one way that would have drawn. And about queenside castles, I said, as Mikhail Tal used to say, you have to remember here that white can only capture one piece at a time. Can only capture one piece at a time. So, you know, he had a position where I think he had 4 pieces hanging, and he put a 5th on pre. And you know, people are like, "You're completely insane. How could you put another piece onto a loose square?" And he said, "Well, you can only capture 1 piece at a time." You know, very simple, calm, obvious, but astute point. So here with you know, I love the codependence of the pieces as well. The knight defends the bishop, which defends the knight, which defends the bishop. It's like so beautiful, right? When you look at the geometry of it. So here we go. Take, 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 take. Okay, look at all the pressure I have here. Rook cg2, holding the pawn. Okay, I advance my majority. And here's another move that the computer did not catch, but I'm just thinking about it from a total common sense perspective. All right, well, I'd like to coordinate the rook better, move the rook somewhere else, like to d8, for example, and kind of freeze their play. And I think I should be very close to drawing. Yes, in this position, I only have 2 pawns for the piece, but remember what I said. No bishop pair anymore. They have these 3 isolated pawns. So here's the funny part. The computer, even on a strong computer at high depth, the computer was saying that rook h8 was plus 1.3, plus 1.4, basically thinking it's very close to winning, if not winning. So I analyzed rook h8, and I'm like, well, you need to prove it to me. I'm the jury here. You have to prove to me that this is winning. And I put in the move into the computer, and I let it run to depth 50, and then it goes, excuse me, International Master, who likes to prove the computer wrong. It appears you have a point here. And the score steadily drops. Plus 1.4, then it's plus 1.1, then it's plus 0.8, then it's plus 0.5, then it's plus 0.45 or so, which is way below the threshold of whatever would be a win in correspondence chess or high-level engine chess. And there was a grandmaster who used to ask me about this a lot. He would say, how do you keep finding moves that the computer thinks are really strong and you don't really think it's anything? And I said, yeah, it all comes down to burden of proof. Can you actually prove it? And look, if I have a crazy positional advantage that looks positionally dead for the other side, then I might say plus minus. But positionally, it's actually not that great for white. It's just materially. It's giving you the score because of the material situation. And if it can't prove it, we're probably talking about a draw here. So rook f5, knight d2, take, take. Okay, so now it's 2 rooks versus 2 rooks and a bishop. Now, what do I want to do? I want to get in that f6 move. I want to leave them with only the pawns on the queen side. Remember, I said that we could very likely defend our queen side quite easily. So I go f6, bing, bing, check, and king to b6. And yeah, once this is achieved, we have a draw. We have a draw in this position. So yeah, I did tons of computer analysis, high depth on this position, and white is not able to win this. So really a super interesting discovery that queenside castle, which was missed by literally, I think if you go online and you look for the analysis and you go through different videos, I don't think anybody covered this. And I made a post about it online. It got, I think maybe 100 people liked it, something like that. But yeah, I mean, it's not unusual that there will be international masters messaging me about stuff like this, like, whoa, that's pretty crazy. And I mean, my answer in general is just, it all comes down to burden of proof. You have to prove everything in chess. And if I'm not convinced, I'm going to just keep going. And like I said, most obvious move principle. All right, well, queenside castle is really kind of an obvious move. That's my only castling I can play. And notice another thing. It brings in my last piece when I have a lead in development, so might as well try to use my lead in development because that's all I've really got. And I'll show you one more line after bishop c5. Because, by the way, I don't have that much more to show in this game, simply because he ends up losing the piece for almost nothing and losing the game. So, so after b4, bishop b6, rook g3, a5. Again, smart move, trading off material. Take, take. Take, take. So now they get the piece. Now they get the piece, but I have this move. And look at the quality of the pieces. The pieces are quite aggressive in attacking that g5 pawn. 95, take. Remember what I said. This is exactly what we wanted to do before. Pile up on the isolated pawn. We have 2 isolated pawns here. Let's pile up on them. Take. Bishop c5 and bishop d6. Yeah, and once again, I analyzed this position very deeply, and white is unable to win. It's the same classic problem with no serious targets and with no passed pawns and no ability to attack the king. How exactly do you want to win the game? You know, are you going to try to go crazy attacking f7? Well, not going to work out effectively. You're going to go crazy against b7. So ultimately, I think really high quality analysis, but he was still within the drawing range, and this is the move that cost him. And the following move is basically what everybody was saying, and I think Ding even said himself after the game was what shocked him. And, you know, I talked about the trifecta of difficult moves. 1 square moves, retreating moves, and sliding moves. Sliding moves, there's a chapter in Chess Logic and Practice, which is right behind me, that black book. A lot of people told me that they looked through the sliding moves chapter. They looked at all the diagrams. Took them 2 minutes, and they said, oh, actually, you know what? I had an international master take a lesson from me. He came over to my apartment. He looked in that book, and he said, oh, very interesting. I've never heard of this term before. I said, yeah, I kind of invented it. That's the only chess term which you can really say I've invented. I mean, for example, when I talked about sideways pins, I mean, that's... everyone knows what I'm talking about, so it doesn't even need to really be enshrined in chess history in the anthologies, in the positional chess or tactical chess anthologies. Everyone knows what I'm talking about. But, yeah, well, I was saying the trifecta of difficult moves. 1 square moves, retreating moves, and sliding moves. And, you know, here you go, getting hit with the retreating move. And that is typically a kind of move a lot of people miss in their calculations. And he didn't take on d4, of course, because the rook on g1 would be hit. So, knight to e2. I said this was the star move that Ding missed, trapping the c2 bishop for good and winning the game. Yeah, I did see even some grandmasters try to analyze this and try to find some ideas to prolong the game, but there's really only one idea. The only idea that you really have here, king takes d2, another move some people praised. I mean, seemed kind of like an obvious move to me, you know, honestly. But the only idea for black is you try to go a5 and see if you can go a4. You know, maybe you go b5 before, try to create a passed pawn, or just try to trade off more pawns. Again, if we can get 2 of these 3 pawns off the board, he just may not be able to win with that singular last pawn. But you know, I think it's just simply too difficult to set that up here. King c1. By the way, if a4, I can go king b1, a3, b3. So I play this out. Bishop d4, king b1, rook d2, take, knight f3, bishop h3, bishop g4. Yeah, I analyzed this all a bit and concluded that here white actually does have pretty good coordination and should ultimately be able to win it. Yeah, a switch back there, weakening the structure, and then moving back. Yeah, white should be able to win this, but clearly a5. I mean, when you look at how short the game was, Ding would have been super happy to get this. He resigned on move 37. Here we're on move 46, and at the moment we still have 2 pawns for the piece, plus opposite colored bishops, which obviously does not guarantee a draw for us here, but increases their chances if, you know, we're able to defend stuff on the dark squares generally. Okay, so knight e5, knight d4, that was a nice move. Rook d8, king e2. Another nice little kind of tucking in sequence. Nice little 1 square move. And once again, I said black needed to rush the a-pawn and hope for more pawn exchanges. Yeah, that was a point that seemed obvious to me. A lot of people didn't mention that, but we don't have that many ideas. Plus, we are advancing the majority, so super purposeful. Take, bishop e3, defending the pawn. Rook a1, king f3, king g4. bishop c5, and then rook h3, swinging the rook over. Yeah, that was my analysis here. Yeah, I analyzed this line and I said it's, it's not enough. And also keep in mind that white got to keep the bishop pair here. That's also very important. Keeping the bishops is quite valuable here. So that was the one differentiating factor from this line. This line had more drawing chances for sure. There are more drawing chances for sure in this line. So that's what he wished he could have gotten. Trade off the bishops on d4 in that line. All right, so let's go back to this. Rook h2, bishop g2, nice move. a6, b3. Yeah, some people praise b3. I mean, yeah, it's kind of obvious. I mean, you get the bishop, you get the pawn off the diagonal, not attacked by the bishop anymore. c4 is controlled, pretty natural. Rook c1. Yeah, I thought maybe this would make sense to just go rook h8 and knight g4. Again, just trying to get rid of that bishop pair there, and just basically say, all right, well, once again, this is the best that we can. This is the best kind of imbalance that we can get with black. 2 pawns for the piece, opposite colored bishops, 3 isolated pawns. We can't hope for anything better. Also keep in mind, it's move 37 here. So this game might realistically go on for another 30 moves. And that just increases the chances that maybe we trade off another pawn successfully or win one of the pawns. I mean, if you can win one more of those pawns, you get a real chance of drawing. But king to e7 was played. Yeah, and then he went back. Yeah, there were also some ideas of like bishop c5 in different lines. So yeah, bishop g3, knight f3, another nice move. Yeah, if take, knight d7, and knight c5. Yeah, I do think this was the most interesting idea for black. Again, just trying to attack as many things as we possibly can. And bishop c4. Yeah, white should be able to win this, but that was clearly the best option. Yeah, unfortunately, trading after you trade the knights, it's over. Also, by the way, if you take here, I go take on d7, check. Well, now the king, now everything is in trouble. By the way, you also have ideas if the king goes back. You have ideas of bishop h4 with rook d8, kind of an opera mate possibility there. Yeah, and here I have this and it's over. Yeah. So anyway, you went bishop d4, rook h1, another nice move. Bishop h3, nice touch, hitting the rook. Yeah, he goes f5 and bishop f4. Yeah, the best he could do is take. Well, he loses the piece. Check and take. It's over. That's simply over. Yeah, just go rook e1. Trade off the rooks, and that's the ball game there. Rook h5. Of course, he resigns. I have many moves I can play here. This is probably the most obvious. Take. And if take, I just take here, and I'm up a full rook. So. Yeah, disappointing loss just because it was so unnecessary. There was no need to go for bishop c2. Also, it had no real upside. Like, what's the best case scenario of that? Oh, I'm going to try to steal the pawn and go knight b6. I mean, that was far-fetched. Knight d2 came in quickly. I mean, if he had played this and saved the game, I heard some people saying like, oh, that's too hard. How would he find that? Well, it's a world championship match. Let's keep that in mind. I mean, this is as serious as chess can possibly ever get. It doesn't get any higher than this. Like if you had like a mini match between Ding and Carlsen, if it wasn't a world championship match, it just wouldn't be at this level of seriousness. So this is as high as it gets. And I do think it's reasonable to expect to at least have a very serious discussion of like, well, hey, maybe he could have really gone into that and actually saved the game. And what would have been really funny about this? This would have been the second game of the match where he castles after move 20 with black after very sharp play, and him castling is essentially a decisive move in the outcome of the game. Now, let me show you one thing, because for chess fans and chess historians, this will be quite important. him trapping his piece in the opponent's camp, his piece is trapped after move 19. It is trapped here after move 19. There was one case, the shortest loss in World Championship match history. You know which game I'm going to say? It was Game 8, where Anand beat Gelfand when Gelfand was up 1-0 in decisive games in that match and had just won a game. And I'll show you that game. I believe I recall that game from memory. But Gelfand was up 1-0. Like, what do you want to do? Play solidly, play symmetrically, play with no risk, try to equalize concretely by force, don't give the opponent anything, have no reason to play for any imbalance or any extreme dynamism. Again, you want to have that three-parter. If you do lose a game, Gelfand was a king of playing the Petrov. So the Petrov was kind of his bread and butter, actually why he was able to even make it into the World Championship and playing it so well in the World Cup. So what do you want to do? What do you want to do when you're in that type of situation? I would say, play symmetrically, where it's very hard for the opponent to attack your king, get any kind of crazy pawn storm, have extreme weaknesses in your camp. But most importantly, if you ever do lose that kind of a game, I'll show you the game in a minute, you want it to be because they fought very hard to get a small edge. Then it took a ton of work to turn that into a positionally decisive edge. And then still a ton of work to convert the advantage. So you need to make them do all three of those things. And by the way, in general, if you have, let's say you're playing black against a much stronger opponent, if you make that your approach to make your opponents do all three of those things, put the burden of proof maximally on the opponent, a lot of people aren't going to be able to do this. I mean, most players you're playing, I would imagine, are not going to be professional players. And many players, if they slip up at any stage of that, they let you right back into the game. I had a chapter in Chess Logic and Practice, my second book, on when you have to go for it. And I had examples where one side was defending for a long time, and then suddenly the momentum shifted, and the game totally changes. All right, let me show you the ridiculous game. Anand Gelfand, when Gelfand was up 1-0 and made the exact same error. All he needs to do is play safely, symmetrically, not allow anything from the opponent whatsoever, make him have to fight super hard for everything he gets, every edge, every positional plus, every conversion, every single thing he has to fight very hard for. Well, he went for something extremely dynamic and unbalanced. He played this line. I believe he played d6. Anyway, move order doesn't matter here. So here, bishop to g7, knight e2. Anand played this line with knight ec3. Castles, knight ec3. And now knight h5. And you start to see this move and you go, uh-oh, is this a computer move or something? Was he just praying for g4 or something like that? You got to be super careful about engine moves because from a human perspective, what most people do in these kinds of same-ish positions is they play pawn breaks. In closed positions, in general, your first priority is pawn breaks. So they look for e6 and they look for b5. How can you prepare b5? Well, there are a lot of lines where people play stuff like, knight e8 to c7, a6. They play bishop to d7. Yeah, after going knight d7 to e5, they go rook b8, a6, everything like that. But anyway, so knight h5 was played. He plays bishop g5, bishop to f6, take. Yeah, I saw that and I'm like, well, that's a pretty strange structure, but okay. Queen d2, logical move, denying the knight the f4 square. So here comes f5, take, g4. Now, he's not losing the piece because there's bishop takes b1. But imagine playing this when you're up 1-0 in a world championship match where you're one of the most solid players in the world, and presumably you'd think you could draw, maybe not at will, but draw very comfortably against anybody in the world. And then suddenly you're playing this position. Check. king d1. Great move by Anand, obviously, but you'll see how ridiculous this is. Take. And here we can call this one of the worst blunders in World Championship match history. I mean, I know there have been one-move blunders, but this is as bad as it gets considering the situation. Considering you only have to draw a few games and you're the world champion. And like it makes a huge impact in your life. It makes a huge impact for your country. It has just a colossal effect on the history of chess, even on some level. And he plays the outrageous stinker of queen f6. So he goes after the rook. Well, what happens then? He gets his queen trapped. So he gets his piece trapped deep in the opponent's camp. Yoink. Take. King c2. Okay, I guess you could call this a case of attacking with the king. Take. Queen f2. And he resigns. I'm just going to go bishop to d3. And I'm going to win the queen. So he's up 1-0. And he loses in 17 moves. Getting his queen trapped for no reason at all in the opponent's camp. No logical reason whatsoever for this to happen. And this is why we talk about there being World Championship openings. That's why people said that about the Semi-Slav. About, I mean, you could even say mainline Slav, but Petrov. Things like that. Also, Queen's Gambit Accepted is considered a World Championship level opening. Why? Well, in the Queen's Gambit Accepted, we often trade off 2 pawns very early in the game. And with those pawns traded off, it just minimizes the chances of them getting a positional edge if you can do everything by force. But, yeah, I mean, this is exactly what I thought of. When I saw Ding have his bishop trapped on c2 after e4, I just thought, oh no, here we go. Same thing I saw when I was watching the game live between Anand and Gelfand, game 8. He gets his piece trapped deep in the opponent's camp for no reason. He had no need to do that whatsoever. He could have chosen a solid, safe way to play. Let's read again what I said at the beginning, and we'll end on this note. This game featured poor metagame strategy by Ding Liren. When you're in the lead in a vital match, always choose the safest alternatives when available and minimize risk. So he maximized risk with almost no possibility of a payout. There was no payoff here. There's no way this could end favorably. I mean, he wasn't even threatening to take the pawn in any of those situations. He had one chance to play bishop e7 in the game, like I commented, but outside of that, he was basically just defending the whole way. So, yeah, this was just an insane risk that absolutely did not need to be made. Similarly to pretty much all of the play that Gelfand had, again with no chance of a payout. Yeah, no, it could never pay off. You know, weird structure, everything weird about this way of playing. And, you know, then he goes queen f6, and one of the worst blunders I've ever seen. I mean, especially based on the situation. Now, the one thing I will give Ding credit for, why I will call his blunder not as bad, is that he did have ways to give back his material. You know, I was pointing out this line. In particular, where we leave the pawn on f3 so we can maximize what we get out of this. You know, this line here. Boom. Take, f6. Now look what we achieved from that. We got 3 pawns for the piece, and we left them with only those doubled and isolated pawns. So if you can get that out of it, sure. But basically you can see here that the ethos behind it all was the same. The same flawed thought process was present. Hey, let me take this huge risk while I'm up 1-0. I mean, unexpectedly. And if I can draw a couple games here, you know, if I can draw 3-4 games with black with solid play, my opponent might be in huge trouble and might be panicking, but just puts a piece deep in the opponent's camp for no reason, with no possible way it could benefit him. And, yeah, ends up losing the piece on move, he lost the piece on move 25. Basically, knight e2, the retreating move, is what stunned him. But it's exactly why I talk about the trifecta of difficult moves. One square moves, retreating moves, and sliding moves. But if you want more material to look at, you can check out Chess Logic and Practice, my second book. A lot of themes from this game, applying logic in chess, my first book. Or you can check out the Facebook page called Chess Culture, which only has a few people on it, but I post stuff there sometimes, so you may want to check it out. It's all free, a lot of good posts, a lot of good valuable stuff. All right, catch you next time. Bye-bye.